want to talk about blood rituals. Ethan, tell me about some blood rituals.
Oh, okay.
And during the few moments that we have left, we want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
And welcome back to High Level Casting. My name's Jeremy, and I hate the sound of my own voice. I'm joined here with my lovable co-hosts, Doug, the noted
occultist.
noted occultist.
Warlock,
Yes.
occultist and mindset expert.
Oh, and resident theosophist.
Mm-hmm. Animal
He has
of
lots
the
of
future,
titles.
Zach, and then we have our buddy Ethan. So we just recently watched the glorious Technicolor film Color Out of Space, starring Nick Cage, and with a notable new director. Who knows about this guy?
He is not a new director. So director Richard Stanley. Richard Stanley he directed a movie called Hardware, in like early 90s. He was a rising star in Hollywood for a while, kind of like a Quentin Tarantino, a little bit. Indie horror type movies. Yeah. He pitched a adaptation of The Island of Dr. Moreau.
Oh, that's right.
95, 96. It was picked 96. Up by, I believe, Miramax, and they decided to fuck up the entire production. And it ruined his entire career. He was blacklisted for it. He is the subject and star of a little documentary called The Isle of Lost Souls about the nightmarish production of The Island of Dr. Moreau. And I recommend anyone listening, including you guys, to watch it if you haven't, because it's one of the best movies I've seen. Like,
I can plus one that recommendation.
I love movies about making movies, and this is a crazy movie. And Richard Stanley's kind of a crazy guy. I don't know if I would call him a sorcerer, but he definitely.
I think he would call himself a sorcerer.
Yeah. Anthropologist, so he's a fellow traveler.
Yeah, I encourage anybody to Google him and just look at his
Just look at him.
Just look at him.
And he has been living alone in a castle in France for like 30 years and decided to come off the mountain to direct Color Out of Space. Produced by Elijah Wood, noted weirdo for the last 10 years or so. Yeah. And it's a good comeback. It's a pretty nice movie. Yeah, I just watched it last night.
After experiencing films such as Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I had never seen before until last year, and then Hereditary and Midsommar, which I can only describe as experiences, Color Out of Space just had a very casual, I just walked out of the theater response. It was just fun. I enjoyed it. It was. It has some depth to it, as all Lovecraftian horror does, but at the same time, this isn't going to make you question who you are as a person, because you yourself are not encountering a new color that will, seep into your brain and make you, consume your own family. But anyway,
I would agree with that.
We'll talk about Lovecraft and his experiences with our universe and how it inspired him to write some of that in a little bit. But let's just talk about the film. What happened?
We got a lot of movies now about family dynamics and families falling apart, what you bring to the family, how you fit in. This is a movie about family, and this is a movie about a family coming together. We have a pretty average family out in the rural part of Massachusetts. Arkham is in Massachusetts. We are in the Lovecraft mythos. Yeah. So we're somewhere in the forest outside Arkham, Massachusetts.
We are in Twisted Evil Oz.
Yeah, we're presented with a beautiful opening about forests the axes have never touched and mist-soaked glades. And we have a pretty average family. We got a man and his wife, 2 teenage kids, and 1 younger kid, and a dog. This family has its problems, like all families. The wife has just gone through some pretty serious cancer surgery. She's had a mastectomy, and so she's trying to get back into the normal swing of life. The 2 teenage kids are in the rebellious teenager phase. The daughter, Lavinia, she's in her rebellious emo witch phase. The brother is in the budding conspiracy theorist pot smoker phase.
I'm still in both of those
Budding,
phases.
you say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
budding. But it's a family that's like they're keeping it together. The dad, Nathan Gardner, played by Nicolas Cage. You know, he's a bit of a quirky guy, but he's keeping his family together. He's living the dream. And then one night they have a new visitor. A strange and beautiful meteorite crashes into their front lawn, and from then on things take a turn for the bizarre and horrifying. The meteorite mutates the land around it, does some strange things, and this family is also changed, and they have to try to survive the new threat that has been crashed into their lives.
Big flash, like a pink light, or actually, I don't even know what color it was. It wasn't like any color I'd ever seen before.
It all ends as a terrible nightmare.
It's also important to note that not only does it infect like the land and everything that you're describing, but it also is altering the properties of time and
Yes.
space around the area as well, which is very hard to comprehend at times, but it's really interesting when you catch it in the film.
Yeah, the ultimate question, right, is my perception of reality being changed, or is actually reality being warped as we know it? In this localized
We
area?
can't take anything for granted. Yeah, after that thing hits, at first it's kind of normal. They're all shocked. They're trying to figure out, oh, what's this thing? They call the news. The news comes, presents Nathan Gardner as a fucking weirdo.
Makes him look like shit, and it's great. It's like the funniest part of the film.
Very quickly, I would say this is a movie that escalates. It hits beats where, you know, you're like, holy shit, something really weird just happened, and then it gets even crazier.
I think all of us were at one point like, what is going on here? And then like continue watching film, and then like speaking to the ether, like what is happening here? Like,
what was your
spoilers, bro? Jeez.
What was I don't want to get
anything
too deep into spoilers, but what was your like what the fuck turning point? We were like, oh, we're watching this kind of movie, because it's a slow build, I think, and so as someone who watches horror, you're waiting for like that
the
turn.
Moment, right? Yeah,
you know,
and that it hits like a freight train, at least for me.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of horror, you know, because I think the general idea of horror is that it inserts itself into our lives, oftentimes violently and without warning. And so a lot of movies, they don't start, you know, with the horror. They will have this slow build where everything's normal, and there will be, like you said, a turning point. And so probably, I think for me, it was when you just started seeing a lot of fucking purple flowers everywhere.
Yeah, I will say it's a very visually beautiful movie.
Yes, subtlety I appreciate.
The whole point of the original Color Out of Space was that H.P. Lovecraft wanted to produce something that's truly alien. He was frustrated by mundane attempts at explaining extraterrestrial or extraplanar life. And so he wanted to create something that was truly unknown to us. And so the color, I guess, is our antagonist, is presented as this. It's not an entity per se. It kind of manifests as an entity from time to time, but it's really just a color. We see lots of beautiful colors.
And I mean, which is a wonderful idea. And I don't know who truly has the original idea in a human society that's thousands of years old, right? But he's the first one to kind of popularize this idea of that being horror. And I mean, we've all kind of had that moment where you're just sitting in the arts and crafts aisle or outside as a child, and you realize, what if the blue that I'm looking at isn't the blue that someone else is experiencing?
That deep philosophical question.
Right.
10-year-old Jeremy had thoughts.
I did. God damn it.
What if?
Man, I just had this thought like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, right. Come on now.
Well, so would you say it's not an entity though? Like if
it's
we're
hard
gonna,
to tell.
Based off the information that the movie gives us, it becomes one with everything around it and turning it into what it knows and it is familiar with.
I will say it's interpreted different ways by different characters, and we see a lot of like classic horror tropes.
Let's go through those, because I think those will really kind of help us run through the characters. Let's run through how the characters experience the color. So very first off, I think Nathan,
Yep, you have Nathan Gardner.
Yeah, he's the one that smells it.
Mm-hmm.
He just smells it. And
smells like a dog on fire.
It's really interesting to watch all of these people experience their own things. Like, he's so adamant and vocal about the smell, and nobody ever, though you only have one comment, I don't smell anything, and it's never brought up. Like, everyone else just glosses over his smelling issues, just like everyone else glances over everyone else's issues. But
and so
it's just interesting.
It's presented as, I will say, yeah, I guess in this we can also get into the characters a little bit more, right? One of the things that Nick Cage's character, he's a great dad in this movie, at least at the beginning. But one of the things he's afraid of is he had an abusive, mean father that he does not want to become. And as these people unravel, as this thing influences them, his transformation, very literally, he like becomes his father in bouts of anger.
I'm very glad that you brought that up, because they set up the character of his father with literally one sentence,
where he's making a voice, like an asshole voice.
He's saying, I don't want to be my father. And she's like, oh, don't worry, you're not. And he's just like, I can still hear his voice. And he's just like, you're never going to be a fucking painter. Just do me a favor and get the fuck out of my face. And he's doing this thing with his hands, and his voice changes.
Which is a very, very powerful,
and that's the whole character.
Yeah, it's the character Nick Cage played in Face Off.
Yes,
I couldn't figure out which movie
it was. Get the fuck out of my face.
What the fuck are you talking about? Nothing has been fucking this place up.
But that is literally the outlet that Cage has to incorporate his Cageness into the film.
For him, he's always on the brink of, losing control. And so just that smell, right? Just a little thing that, you know how it is. If that's something you deal with in your own life, there's like that one little tick that will set you off. And that's it for him. A smell that no one else can see. Everyone else is like, nothing's wrong. And so that's what gets him to break down, right?
Yeah, the representation of his father's imitation is a way of like displaying that he at that moment is having like a psychotic issue due to everything around.
We get a full Nick Cage performance in this movie. I was very happy for that.
Yeah, we have the full gambit, from loving father to crazy asshole to man holding shotgun.
Because I do feel like at one point you're like, boy, they make a nice couple. There's moments where you're like, okay, this kind of seems staged, or like these relationships seem a little weird, but you can't help but feel like you're like, oh, this is a family, like budding teenagers who hate everyone and everything, and
there are moments
who parents just trying to keep it together.
Yeah, there are moments where you can just see that Nicolas Cage does have a normal person inside of him somewhere.
Yeah, and especially at the beginning, like.
But speaking of the beginning, that first camera shot of him, you're like, oh, this is Cage. You see that one camera. I
wanted to say that, so I'll say here that like I haven't seen Nick Cage in a movie for a while because I haven't seen a beautiful literary masterpiece Mandy yet. So like when you first see Cage, I'm like, oh, here he is. Here's the man's here, and like his first line is very like. I don't know, it seems like almost fake, like he's doing a Nick Cage thing. And I'm like, oh, he's going to be like really wacky in this movie. And then he like normals out. And I'm like, oh, he's just a normal guy that's a little quirky, like any dad would be. And then he gets into the Con Air voices later. And like, so he does the full range of what he is capable of.
Which is why, like, I love that he's having this kind of horror movie resurgence. As you'll see eventually, Ethan, when we can all finally talk about Mandy in a podcast. You'll see he's finally found his place, right? Like, I think he had a hint of it when he was playing villains, but I think...
If I may don my Nicolas Cage scholar cap as well. It's important, I think, to bring up with regard to his performance. He has a name for his style of performance, and that is nouveau shamanic.
Thank fucking God.
I can see it. Yeah, he's channeling. Like
nouveau shamanic.
He's a charisma caster, baby. He truly
does.
It comes in, he puts it out.
The man has a pyramid as a gravestone already purchased.
It's because he needs to be contained. He won't die.
No, he won't.
He's eternal.
He's a fucking lich, is what he is.
Teresa, played by Jolie Richardson. I don't really know this actress very well.
She's a face I recognize, but I honestly can't. I can't point at a film that she's.
She was
been
on
in.
Nip Tuck.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
Okay. So the first thing we learn about her before we even meet her is that she has cancer or has had cancer. Through we watched the daughter perform a little Wiccan ritual at the beginning, and so this sort of establishes things. And the first time we see her, I think she's like a little weird. Specifically, Nathan is like trying to control her emotional state. Is like, oh, you need to do this and this. Don't upset your mother. And then when she comes out, she's like a little out of it, a little bit.
She's had the surgery. Like, it might be questioning whether or not the cancer's been removed. You know,
I believe the ritual that she's asking is for the cancer not to come back.
Right.
So I think she has beaten it, but it's like just really fresh, I think.
Yeah,
right.
It's at
and
that
so
stage where she's still re-entering life and normal.
She's had a full mastectomy, and so there's intimacy issues. She thinks she's not attractive anymore. Just like the dad, she's trying to keep it together. She seems to have a high-powered, some sort of investment banking job.
She's a broker.
She's a broker.
She's very vague.
It's vague enough.
She's up in the attic.
My clients.
Yeah, she has clients, and she's definitely talking about money, and she's definitely like trying to give advice. So she's a financial advisor, or a stockbroker or some form.
She's saying big short things that I don't fucking understand, but like you could tell she might be the breadwinner of this family.
Oh no, she absolutely is.
Yeah, so
I mean that's
Nick Cage is the sugar baby.
Well, let's get into this now because
he's a stay-at-home dad.
Well, we have these two. Like before the horror sets in, Nick Cage's character is struggling with his own emasculation compared to the standards of his father. Like he's inherited this farm. And his father was this overpowering patriarch, and he's always trying to live up to his dad. But the problem is, it's not a problem, but in this form of toxic masculinity, it is. The problem is his wife makes way more money than him, and probably always has. And so this is a moment in their marriage where the power dynamic has shifted. It's shifted from her, like, to be a financial advisor and to be a stockbroker is someone who has to be on 24/7, who is just making cash, giving advice, and commanding the troops, and those troops are dollar signs. And because of this cancer that's happened, she's lost all of that power, and she's trying to gain it back.
She's trying to get back. That makes sense.
We see that with her struggles with Wi-Fi and her struggling with the phone calls and whatnot. And we also see this manifested in Cage's character, where he's trying to play catch up with her, and this is kind of his moment to kind of take the reins with his family and tell the kids, like, don't be loud or don't fight in front of your mother. And so
he's cooking meals.
He's cooking meals, and he's terrible at it, but we love him for it.
He's making fancy French dishes
and he's
his mother's favorite.
And he's taken probably a large sum of the family's savings and invested it in the animal of the future, alpacas. Alpacas in this New England rural estate.
We get a little bit of that like this must be a recent change in their life where they've moved from the city back to the family farmhouse.
I initially thought that it was like super fresh, but then on my rewatch, I realized that I think that they've been there at least the course of a year.
Okay, that makes sense.
Still pretty brief, but also at the same time, it's almost like this annual, because we have this moment between the husband and wife, right? Where they're like, this is ours. We're here. We made it.
Right.
My father
this is the dream. We're living the dream.
Yeah.
Because they redesigned the property.
Redesigned it. Can we just talk really quick? Like the setting is very strange.
Oh, I love it.
But so outside of the house, it's kind of just like in the woods. It's like not
entirely is
or a farm we would understand as a farm. We're all Midwestern trash. We know what a farm looks like. This is just in the woods, and there are giant floodlights.
Yes,
just around the house, and on the house there are lights too.
They are on the house, just peering down like a panopticon.
Looks like a Close Encounters of the Third Kind, like mothership. landing.
Did anybody get any significance about the arrangement of the lights on the house? Because
I think it's just lights.
They circled back to it several times.
Pattern, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that pattern,
and it was always like super bright scene where like they lit up and then like shut off or something. Like
I don't know, like kind of thinking, and I'm spitballing now. I'm shooting from the hip. I'm thinking, those lights might even signify control of their own lives, control over their domain. Because most of mankind's history has been us battling back the wilds, battling back nature. And those floodlights, I feel like in this very rural setting, kind of signify their control over their domain. And we have this invader at this point. But before we go too far off into kind of the themes of this film, we still have, what do we got?
We got more characters.
5 more characters?
Yeah. So
let's burn through these kids.
Breakdown.
Yeah, let's burn through these kids.
Can I say
just like the color out of space?
The summary thesis of the mom is like she's a very typical horror mother in that like the insanity creeps in and you don't exactly know where it starts.
It seemed like she's very attached to Jack.
Oh yeah, she loves the youngest kid because the other 2 are reprobate teens, and we'll get to them.
They're leaving the nest. But let's talk about Jack. He's the simplest.
Okay, yeah, Jack is very much Shining Kid. Like he's small weird kid who, talking about his relationship with the color out of space, sees it as, he calls it like the man in the man in the well, his friends.
Man in the well, his friends.
Yeah,
so he's seeing it as a very human thing. He looks weird with he has the same glasses his dad has, the big black frames. He just looks like a weird kid. He whistles.
It's important to note that he's also from Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, another horror special. So for being such a young child actor, like he
had to have shot that back to back shoot because he looks exactly the same size.
Yeah.
Damn.
But I wanted to just say on Jack that the scene where he's outside later on, just standing in the yard staring at the well, and Ward is like, "Hey bud, how you doing?" And he's just like, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm just hanging with my friends." And he's just like, "Okay then, like have fun."
Yeah.
And and the laugh that Jack gives is truly terrifying.
Yeah, like, it's good. I love that.
And I was just like, what great acting.
Hey kiddo, what are you up to?
Playing with my friends.
Okie dokie. Well, have fun, okay?
So, but that was like my favorite Jack scene. But
he's pretty good for a child actor. Usually kids can't act for hell, like even the good ones. But he was decent.
His big thing is just staring.
Yeah,
staring.
I need you to stare in this direction. Fifth take.
And that kind of plays into what we were talking about with the warping of space and time. Like he's just standing there, and he really has like there's scenes where he's standing there in the day, goes to a different person, comes back staring at night. So it's a good representation, but also of mindfuckery.
Well, and Jack's the first one to get traumatized by the color.
Yes. Yeah. As it first lands, it affects him.
So yeah, this movie doesn't really do a great job of like answering the questions that it proposes to you.
I feel like that's intentional,
and it is intentional, and it's well done. But
we'll try to answer some of them on this episode of Highway.
this Eldritch tour.
But I guess like let's continue knocking these kids out. Lavinia, we kind of went over. She's like
Lavinia
a Wiccan,
and Benny. Well, I think they're the most important. Because
they're the ones that stick around the longest. They're the ones that you eventually get the most screen time with.
Because eventually in a horror movie, you have to have a vessel that you're projecting yourself onto in order to get anything out of the film.
And I'd say of any of them, their relationship to the antagonist force is like they're the victims of the horror slasher.
And they have one of the best relationships with each other too, eventually.
Yeah, even though they have some of the greatest brother-sister insults I have heard in a long time.
That's great, yeah.
He always gives her 3 insults that are increasingly worse, like each time, and then she comes back with just like 1 insult of her own, and it's just like a thing that they do.
Go.
Okay.
Go. Just do it already.
Harridan, Harry Axwound.
Maggot dick.
My favorite words in the English language, Harridan. He describes his sister as a Harridan. If you grew up in the Midwest, you either you probably grew up as Benny and you wanted to date Benny. Benny is discovering a relationship with marijuana. He's discovering a relationship with like Art Bell, Coast to Coast AM kind of. He spends his nights listening to some weird metal and using stargazing software to just study space.
Yeah.
Lavinia is a budding practitioner of Wicca and witchcraft.
If I got anything out of this film, it's that I kind of want to get into Wicca.
Like, yeah, why not? Why not? I like it.
When Lavinia's like casting the spell at the beginning, and she's just into it, and she's into it for the sake of her mother, right? Like she's trying to cast a spell to keep cancer away from her mom. And
that's what we've seen her like use it for, but I don't know. We don't really get much of a background about these people before they get to the farm. There's a couple other side characters, but the two other main characters outside of the family is Ward Phillips, who's the water surveyor, who's inspecting the property at the behalf of the government.
He's the outside protagonist. He's experiencing all this. It looks like he's a graduate of Miskatonic University. You know what? It's not explicitly stated. This is my headcanon. Grad student. He's in grad school. He's got imposter syndrome.
He's got grad student energy.
He seems like
he's got powerful grad student
energy.
He's
got big grad student
definitely
energy.
His first job after grad
back
school.
to the lab. I can fix it.
Yeah.
Right. I gotta talk to my advisor.
Outside of his intellect and such, I feel like the most important thing to note about Ward as a character is that he's not from the area. He has not had any sort of exposure to anything, and he immediately questions everything because that's what he's there to do.
He's a foreigner. He's an outsider to Arkham, which, if you're listening, that is not originally from Batman. That is originally from Lovecraft, and that is why it was chosen for Batman. It's the outsider, creepy nexus of his universe. And it's no wonder that the Batman writers wanted to put the name Arkham on the asylum.
I want to point out Ward's name, Ward Phillips. HP, H standing for Howard. Phillip.
The mysterious case of, what is it, Charles
Dexter Ward.
Ward! Oh my God. He's every one of them.
Well, I think Ward might also be a shortened form of Howard. I don't know. I could be.
Yeah. Normal family, normal farm, except they have a squatter that lives on the property named Ezra, played by Tommy Chong. He is Tommy Chong.
Yes. He's not playing a character. He is himself.
He's got an eco off the grid small home. You know, he's living the millennial dream. He's got a small home.
God,
he does have a tiny home.
A tiny home. He's got a cat named G-Spot.
He's probably got a composting toilet in the back.
Yep.
Yeah.
He goes off solar. He's an ex-electrician, so he's able to wire everything.
I was expecting Ezra to be like the weird sorcerer mutant that a Lovecraft story would have, because he's described as, he lives on our property. He's a little slow. Nick Cage calls him a little slow, and they don't talk much. So I was expecting a monster, and he's like
special.
Yeah, he's just a pothead.
He's just a hippie.
He's beautiful hippie.
He's fucking smarter than everyone else.
He probably has Redbox D&D in there. You know, you could play first edition all day.
Ezra knew everything as it was happening.
He plays an important role, though. And so, again, with his relationship with the Thing, he is the one that records the, hideous eldritch description of what's happening. So, at the closer to the end of the movie, we go back to see what has become of him, which is not good. And there's just a tape recorder of him speaking, and he's, again, this very beautiful description of, this thing came to us and it wants to make the world something familiar to it, right?
It's the natural conundrum of why were they recording, right? It's like this is naturally a kind of not a found footage film, but as our external hydrologist narrator discovers this family and kind of relates it to the audience, how does he find things out? He finds it out through Ezra's recordings. Something has to kind of feed him.
His role is like the Miskatonic grad student reading the Necronomicon and learning about the old ones, right?
Yeah.
From him, you get the mythos revealed. And he's just funny. He's a great guy.
He's great.
Love him. I feel like, again, there's probably an Ezra, if you grew up in the Midwest, there's probably an Ezra in your life that you probably should not have hung out with.
He had a few magazines he would definitely share with you.
Yeah.
So the recordings that Ward comes in on later, I actually didn't realize those were recordings. I thought that was the color, like just speaking through the speakers, because it had been interfering with audio. Anytime cell phone calls were made, the way he's speaking to it's unnatural. Like, I don't think, and maybe it was a recording, and maybe he was already like under the influence of the color by that point. But the way I was hearing it, I thought it was the color speaking through Ezra, through Ezra's speakers.
That's a beautiful transition, by the way, because the last real character is the color.
I wanted to say that too. Let's talk about color out of space. The most important.
Doug, tell me more about the color.
It's beautiful. Beautiful color.
You would like me to tell you more about the color, but I don't know that I can, because we know so little about the color. Besides,
let's talk about, like, first, before we dive into the color itself as portrayed in the film, going back to kind of my existential, like, 12-year-old body. If blue is for me but it's not for someone else, how? Trying to describe and experience a truly alien phenomenon, color is a really great way to kind of use that experience and try to communicate that experience to a reader or to a viewer. Because, and in the film, it's like this glorious hot pink, right? Because it is so thoroughly unnatural. In the short story, we don't get, like, it was like a hot pink. No.
Everything was black and white back then.
Everything was black and white.
Color wasn't invented yet.
Color wasn't invented until it was invented by Technicolor in the
and is the
20th
color
century.
The color's not even described in the movie, really, is it?
Well, it's because it's transitioning. Like, it's never just like one hue or shade. So it's like a purple, magenta, pink, etc. So it's always changing. But that's just a color choice that the director shows to display it for your eyes.
But I don't think anybody actually says
it's magenta. No.
No, because they don't know how to explain. I mean, can you describe the color blue? Like, without saying blue? Like, how do you describe a color, especially a color that you've never seen?
Speaking as somebody with color blindness.
You
are colorblind.
He doesn't see color.
I just don't see color, guys.
The color out of space is all color.
No, I actually have, I forget what the technical term, but it's red-green color blindness, I think. And there are certain shades of green that I cannot discern. To give an example, my dad had this pair of work gloves in his truck for the longest time that were, I swear to God, green. And he told me, no, those are brown. Now, knowing my dad, he could have been just fucking with me all those
times. Right. The natural relationship between father and son.
Right. But no, I got it corroborated by others that no, those are definitely brown gloves, when I swear to God they were green.
Colorblind testing. If you were cast into this movie, if you were Ezra shitting in your compost toilet, would you have survived because you're colorblind?
No, because I think it would have it would have gotten right up in my brain.
So yeah, like
I want to say
past just color, right?
Well, the one way it's described by the characters, and it's important, is that it's beautiful. So even at the height of their degradation and deformity, as it is destroying them, they are entranced by it.
Yeah.
It's something they cannot.
That's a really good description, because that's basically how you feel as you're watching all of these characters go through their own scenes. They recognize what is happening and why it is strange, but then almost as soon as they like realize it, they recognize it and then they forget almost.
They can't. You don't have a choice. Yeah.
Which is like, quick side note in horror fiction, like there's always a problem, you know, like especially in slasher films, for like the dumb victim syndrome, where like instead of running to the car that they have the keys for, they like go in the basement, right? For Color Out of Space, each one of these characters they're having moments of clarity, but they're losing those moments because the color isn't just a color. Imagine radiation, because at one point Nick Cage gets very burned by life forms.
Yeah.
So there are definitely radiation themes and radiation fears, Chernobyl level fears with this. But what if Chernobyl had sentience? What if Chernobyl could enter your brain and communicate with you? Like the experience of being infected. And that's like kind of going back to the theme of the film and the theme of color, is that we see again and again and again the theme of poisoning. We see the poisoning of the well. We see the poisoning of the cancer in the body. And what we see now is that the color itself is a cancer in this environment. And it is infecting multiple organisms within it.
What does the color do?
One of the better quotes from the film by Ezra is his description of what is happening. He says, it's not out there, it's in here. It's in the static. It's in the moisture. Up is down, fast is slow. What's in here is out there. And what's out there is in here now.
Oh, you got the whole thing down.
Yeah. So it is becoming everything.
It's becoming reality,
Yes. It is distorting everything around it and becoming it, and that's including time and space. So like it is becoming the water, it is becoming the foliage, it is becoming the animals,
becoming
and
time,
controlling everything to its will and bending it.
Okay, so what does it do though?
It lands on Earth and it changes the direct environment to what it is familiar with and comfortable with. So I personally viewed this as like it could be something engineered to conquer systems, like, and it's just sent out. Yeah, it's just sent out into, but obviously this,
I'm thinking annihilation. So what it does, it changes the environment, and we see it creates strange vegetation, beautiful pink and purple flowers and blue vines everywhere.
Mutates
and then
life.
It starts to fuse flesh together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The first step is like weird plants, weird fungal creatures, and the second, it starts to affect organisms. There's some bit of rationalization to how it operates. It's not really got into, but the big idea is that it infects the water supply. It infects the watershed, which our hydrologist is very concerned about.
So, like I mentioned before, one of my overarching like confusions and questions was how much was happening before the meteorite actually landed, because the water, Doug mentioned earlier with the wife, how she has like the issues with static all the time, and that was an issue actually present before the meteorite landed. And the water close-ups that they had like 4 different camera close-ups of water and like foreshadowing of it, but it also makes you think like, was that even something that was happening before all of that as well?
I think they were just establishing that the water was important, maybe a little heavy-handedly.
Well, yeah, I think that's my one real criticism of the film is like I imagine like a first run through of the script or a first run through of the raw cut. I don't want to insult any listeners, but
I want to insult every listener.
The vast majority of Americans are mouth breathing consumers. And so we need like 5 establishing shots to say, hey, the water is poison.
And we're still getting those shots even well after we know.
Remember,
hey, the water's real bad.
Yeah,
like
even when you can see the coloration in the ice.
It's in the ice.
At
These
the beginning,
people to drink the well. A well means they drink the water that's next to the house. It is not coming from a plant in the city. Do you know, city goer, what that means? There is definite amazing moments, and I feel like that. Without them, they would probably isolate the film further from its audience, because the idea is, for a film to be successful, you need to communicate it to as many people as possible. But I feel at the same time, so much of what made Lovecraft unadaptable for so long was his vagueness. And
it's because, any representation of what he's trying to do fails. And also, much like with cats, what
Throwback.
people want for movies doesn't jive with what H.P. Lovecraft did in his fiction, from what I know.
The moment where we kind of get to see the perspective of the color, the home world of the color, we kind of get CGI like color world. It's like kind of a Pacific Rim level. Here's what its perspective is, and it's like, stop at that point. Because the whole idea of Lovecraftian horror and the whole idea of color out of space is that, try as we might, there are things that no matter how in depth and well maintained our science becomes, there are things that we will never understand. And in that gap of understanding lies the horror that will consume us all.
Do you remember when it's the scene at night where the meteorite lands and like you have the massive pink explosion and everything? I was just recalling how it has when it gave you that shot of the sky, you could see the meteorite, and then it had a large ring, pink ring. That was the exact same space for the blast at the end. There's a zone that it now controls, and it's just slowly being introduced more.
Yeah. One of the big questions that leads me to is like, why does it end? Why doesn't it just consume the earth?
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of burns itself out and leaves like that ring, a section of ash.
The blasted heath. I feel like you shouldn't try to rationalize it too much, because when people try to rationalize Lovecraft is when it gets fucking.
Why did Benny get in the well?
I mean, because
I would say
it's his dogs were in there.
Much like War of the Worlds or something, it just could not sustain itself in this environment and collapsed. Everything that it touched, besides our good friend Ward,
maybe it wasn't a sustainable, like Earth couldn't.
Kind of like
that's what I'm saying.
Like a tropical flower that like blooms, in New England in the spring, but still dies and cannot go on. It itself is an invasive organism.
So Nick Cage picks up this thing. Yeah, he picks up the slime in the cellar or in the shower. Also, lamest shower. That is not a good shower.
No.
Some movies have great showers. I don't want the shower in this movie. Sorry, but the fungus like latches onto him and he freaks out. And then let's get into some of the weird body horror. He starts getting itchy, and like the next day, you don't know if he's being transformed by the thing or if he's just like fucked up. But his skin looks like alligator skin.
Yeah.
I'm like, and someone's like, dude, what the fuck is wrong with your arm? Later, like, oh, it's just a rash.
Yeah.
As his entire arm looks like it has third-degree burns.
And just like another great example of them, like they notice the changes that are happening around them, but yet like it just doesn't also register. Like, don't worry about that. Like
for him, you see him, he's like scratching his fucked up arms as he's gleefully picking mutant tomatoes, and he's so excited, and then
he thinks they're peaches.
It's great.
That's when you start to get that break, right?
Right.
I don't think I caught that, Doug. I thought that there were peaches as well, but you're saying
he doesn't pull anything from a tree.
No, there are all these like weird space fruits that he brings in, and the thing is, like, I think when he dumps them all in the sink, they look all like these huge weird tomatoes.
Yeah.
But then he's lifting them up, and when we see them in the camera, like most of the time they look like peaches, and he bites into one, bites into that.
Another great example of how they mess with your head.
Oh yeah.
Because I kind of caught that, but I didn't connect the dots. Like that's he even calls he's like, oh, Teresa Peach or whatever.
Yeah, he's like he gets weirdly sexual with the fruit.
He gets sexual about that peach because he wants to get sexual with his wife.
I feel like it's worth also bringing up the classic line from Face Off.
I can eat a peach for hours.
But truly, let's talk about how everybody gets dispatched, because that's the other half of this film is the 10 Little Indians. Yeah. First one to go.
Well, the first person
arguably
to go,
Jack and Teresa.
Yeah. Is Jack and Teresa to go together?
Oh, no.
Cancer baby. God.
Yeah, you're right. It takes a little while for like anybody to die.
Yeah.
We're watching
and technically they don't even die until okay, guys. The first to go are the alpacas.
Yeah, the alpacas.
Yeah, make an alpaca.
When they get John Carpenter.
And once the alpacas are forcibly killed by Cage's own hands,
I'm gonna take care of it.
He decides
Like
he's gonna handle it.
Holding a shotgun.
He's gonna handle it, you know.
Yeah, he's gonna handle it. That's a great fucking moment.
The only way that he can assert power over his domain at that point is through violence.
Yeah,
right?
But
so what happens at this point is we witness all of the alpacas merge together, and Jack is with Benny trying to get what from the barn? I don't know what they're in
I think they're
for.
just checking out because
they're just doing their daily nightly
and
wandering,
looking at it.
And
by now things are getting weird. Like real
this is
weird.
like the turning point of the pacing of the film. They see that all the alpacas are merged together, and it's basically a color bomb is what they notice. So they run out, and this scene was kind of confusing to me because it felt kind of forced. There's no reason why they would be running from the barn, and then Jack would slightly stumble and the mom would run up and hold him in place while the barn is about to explode. Like, I just felt like that was just like,
no, that's not it. Jack loves staring at things, and he's like marveling at the hideous sight before him. He's seeing the color come out, and he likes it because that's his friend from the well. And so his mom tries to protect him, and they get the full Eldritch blast of the space, the color space.
No, like, because when they're running, Benny's holding his arm and he's pulling him along, and he stumbles and lets go of Jack, and he keeps running, and then his mom runs up and grabs him, and they just sit there. She sits there on the ground holding him, and it's just like, if I was a mom, why would you just sit there? Like, you clearly can see the color and everything. Like, but I don't know. That's my perspective. I won't ramble on it too long, but.
You don't know that there's going to be a color explosion.
Well, okay, so the mom doesn't. Okay, the mom doesn't. Sure, yeah,
right.
But
like,
I also think it's a good representation of, like, I think she has an unhealthy obsession with her son, Jack.
I mean, it's a great connection that they got, and we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, they really bonded
because what happens with that bonding?
Their flesh fuses together into a degenerate, suffering creature, and it's like. Truly disturbing.
And
everyone sees it, and they just are like, like, this sucks.
Yeah, what would you do?
What else can you do? Like, this is your wife or
Zach,
your mother.
If your mother and your brother fused into one person?
It's God.
I'd fucking run.
Yeah.
Also, keep in mind though, by this point, like, nobody's thinking rationally because the colors all up in the brains already.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. Like, that's just what's happening.
Right.
So,
which is really, I mean, it's a convenient explanation for a lot of these. Like,
but it's also the entire theme of the film.
But yeah, exactly.
Night and day are the same. G-Spot is a monster. The dog's gone. Like.
So actually,
Spot is a cat. Once again, if you didn't get that earlier,
that's something I actually want to bring up earlier, because we were talking about like the recurrence of radiation throughout, and there's the part where the sheriff shows the hydrologist like all these animal corpses that they
chimera creature
found at the edge of the Gardner property.
Like it looked like they were trying to run from something, and he's like, oh, it looks like radiation burns. He sees like the little, what I think is supposed to be like the jingle
dog
bell
tag
from
the cat.
But
but
we see the cat. There is a weird cat thing that definitely jumps out in front of their car when they're coming back from the hospital.
In the jump scare,
which is before the truck scene.
Yeah, it's before that.
Ezra tells you, like, you may see her, but I doubt you recognize her.
Right.
And then they introduce her, and you don't recognize her. And then like, there must have been, she got caught up in some bad. Got mutated together.
So the stuff that's in the back of the truck, was that what was in the barn then?
No,
it's the exact same thing that happened to the alpacas. It just happened to all the other wildlife.
That's what I thought.
Because they say there's a whitetail in there. There's they mentioned like
a nice eclectic mix. A nice spring mix for your.
It likes to merge flesh together.
Got some baby spinach in there.
And so Teresa and Jack are again in like for me, this is the true wake up moment. hideously fused into something new, and it's something that evolves over time.
It's
It
interesting,
does.
like maybe the animals were like they failed, but the humans were acceptable, like for the full
It's the
transformation.
sentience. In the original short story, we never get really a full description of the monster in the attic, which is in the film, the mother and the son fused into a walking bug, human monster thing, which is fantastic, and I love it. But the general idea is that, this kind of sticks with you. You can fill in the gaps, but at the same time, the unmentionable, unspeakable horror of something new being created that you dareth not speaketh of ever again. You will not conjure it in your space.
And it really fucked me up.
It real fucked Ethan up.
I thought it was a really good, like that. I would say this is the key, like horror set piece of the movie, the
right
creature, if we can call it one, and like how pathetic it is at first, and like you're in this they're suffering.
It's not quite out of pedal. It's not.
Yeah, well, at start it's not moving at all. They're just like in agony.
I mean Oedipus, right? Like.
Oh,
right.
Like okay.
Oedipal.
Yeah.
One of my favorite, like low key cage scene was when.
First of all, no such thing as a low key.
Well, I mean, like it kind of is. It kind of is,
Captain
like, because
Corelli's mandolin.
So when he goes back up and tells the kids to leave, he's about to handle it, and instead he like kisses the monstrosity of his like departing wife
multiple
times. You see the pink saliva all over his lips. And it's just like, and from there he starts getting kind of creepy, and he's just like, "Oh, don't worry, baby. I'm gonna solve. That's what we're gonna do. Like, don't worry." And he's just like, and he's just kissing like her, and it's just like, it's like, but and then that's when he's like, nope, like you're not gonna get away from this. It was kind of like a turning point for everyone.
I really like that scene.
Yeah. No, yeah, for me it was really powerful because, like, the kid, Lavinia and Benny are still alive, and they're like having to deal with the fact that their mother and little brother they're basically dead now.
Yep.
Right.
They're also, they leave without Lavinia leaves without addressing either of them, and Benny leaves and says, "Love you, Dad," which I thought was interesting.
Because because like this is a horrific situation we can't really comprehend.
But like you're leaving your mother and your brother, you would think that they'd be like, "Love you guys, like love you, Dad." Like
we have to tie this into the full circle like moment, because the mother had cancer. The whole idea of their final night, which was interrupted, their final night of lovemaking, which was him convincing her that she still had value to him and that she was desirable. Mm-hmm. And so at this point, he was reaffirming that, yes, I still love you. Yes, you're still desirable. He is coming to terms with the fact that he's going to end her existence, but he is affirming to her in those final, like intimate moments where he's kissing her that, yes, I still love you at this point. And
it just backfires.
It just, because he, the color stops him and he just goes down and starts watching a purple TV. Yeah. And so
that's a really good catch and description. Yeah.
For me, it was powerful because he's making the choice to, like, he doesn't want to just kill his wife and kid. He wants to try to save them, even though it's useless. What happens later is it matures into a tarantula-like monster, and then he locks his daughter in the attic with it, and that's terrifying.
Well, and
he's like, "It's time to feed your mother,"
is a phrase we hear earlier in one of the phone calls.
Yes, I was trying to figure out if I heard that correctly. Yes, thank you. I'm not crazy. She's getting the second phone call from her dad while they're at the hospital.
Right.
See, I couldn't hear any of the things coming out of the phone.
So I heard like bits and pieces. That was one of the bits. Another one was, sounds like Nicolas Cage screaming, "You cocksucker," which he does say later to the car when it's not starting.
Yeah.
So both of those instances were quotes of him in the future.
Yeah.
Time distortion.
Which is where time gets all fucky.
Yeah, but I didn't catch either of those the first time. The second playthrough I was watching on my computer with headphones, and I was like, wait a minute, because I already knew that was coming later, and I was like going back, cranked it up, and I was just like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what they say. So cool. Very cool.
Benny in like the worst inopportune moment, decides to jump into the well because he thinks he finds the dog in there.
Mm-hmm.
And he is consumed. Like, we don't really see what happens to him. He's consumed by the entity that lives in the well.
Did he have goggles with him?
Yeah.
He put on his granddad's old goggles because they were set up earlier. They didn't
There's
do anything.
two items
I
that
guess
they
I
find.
just,
absolutely nothing
set up for that.
Yeah, there's the compass that's shown twice and the goggles that are shown twice.
I apparently missed the compass too because I was trying to figure out. I was like, what the hell is Ward doing with this compass?
So the compass is shown in the very beginning scene where Lavinia is introduced at the lakeside.
Okay.
That's the only time it's shown, and then Ward picks it up at the end. And yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about Lavinia in a couple stages. So we see her in the very first scene. She's doing like freshman in high school's first Wiccan ritual, and it's like, charming. As things are getting bad, she decides to break out into the real shit.
Let's do some blood magic.
Do some blood magic, trying to protect themselves. She cuts herself up really bad, carving sigils and pentagrams onto her skin.
In an attempt to ward off what's happening around her.
Yeah, which doesn't work. She is given, I would say, the most dignified death of the film, in that she is the recipient of the full awesome magnitude of the entity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, through her death, she's basically just dematerialized into this howling pink vortex. And we see through her eyes that are glowing, the Doctor Strange montage of through the wormhole. So she gets probably the nicest one.
Yeah, and it's at that moment we come full circle, because at the very beginning of the film, after she does her ritual, she expresses her deep desire to leave rural, New England.
She wants to get out, right? She hates it. She wants to go back to Hot Topic.
But then, then she, at the end of the film, is like, I live here. And makes the decision to rejoin her family in the color.
She's accepted that this is, like, we can't escape. And then a cop, probably the nicest cop ever, the only blue life that matters, is killed by a living tree. Yeah. Ward makes it out all right. He's fucked up at the end.
So, and that's, of course, not explained, but I think Ward makes it out because he's not tainted by anything.
Right.
Yeah,
like, he's in that blast. Like, he's right next to
And
her.
he wasn't, like, fingered by a living tree, so...
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
He didn't die. And then we also can't forget the squatter, Chong. He just
looked like a corpse.
He looked like he had like his life force like just drained, and then he fucking explodes. Color bomb, baby.
I'm calling it right now. We need color out of space bath bombs. Marketable. Will turn your skin a new color that you get to describe to your family.
Is that everyone that dies? Yeah. And then they drown the land in water.
Yeah, and they drown the land, which there's like a very interesting tidbit that you catch from overhearing a conversation. It's the mayor arguing with someone, and she's like, I don't care if there's ground contamination, like the contracts are already signed, and you get a nasty little glimpse of like the political bureaucratic.
There's some implication that the city and the mayor wanted to buy that old property to flood it anyway to make this reservoir area,
and they never sold.
Yeah
the groundwater is poisoned, right? And then they turn it into a water source for everybody, and we get to see a lovely purple mantis fly across the screen at the very end. Homeboy,
a brief reminder that the madness is still there.
Madness is still there, and it will resurface and consume us all. Hashtag 2020 vibes. I want to talk about blood rituals. I was super excited. Ethan, tell me about some blood rituals.
Oh, okay. So this takes place in what we could broadly call a Lovecraft mythos world. That means the Lovecraft cinematic universe. As she's preparing all of her stuff, she has all of her like Wicca books. She has a copy of the Necronomicon. And so Necronomicon in our world, there's lots of books called the Necronomicon, and they're all like bullshit meme books with like 2 sentences in them over and over again. And so like it was this cute eye roll moment. They're like, oh, she's got like a fake Necronomicon. Then I remembered, oh, this is a world where the Necronomicon would exist. And then I like the idea that the Innsmouth people exist, that Dagon exists, and the Necronomicon is still like a shitty airport paperback.
Because Miskatonic University apparently exists.
They have the yeah.
If I recall, Miskatonic University has the OG,
a really nice original copy,
first edition, written inside by the mad Arab.
Abdul Hazred, the mad Arab.
So I'm just imagining that paperback copy that she has of the Necronomicon is either some publication that is exploiting public domain copyright,
but just the idea that like in some of the Living Dead movies there's like they know what happens in Night of the Living Dead, and maybe there's like TV shows about it, right? And so in this world there's an idea of the Lovecraft mythos, even though it's real, but it's like
it's out there
and wacky, but it's like wacky and like and then weird shit happens.
I mean, it's French culture, right? So it's going to be interpreted. It's going to be, capitalized on.
And why the fuck would you use that for a protection spell? She brings that into her circle, and there's nothing protective about that at all.
Yeah, you're just kind of fighting fire with fire at this point. But let's talk about how this fits into the overall kind of horror mythos and our culture thereof, as we always do.
So one thing, I kind of hinted at this earlier, is that horror is having a renaissance where we see a lot of artistic horror film.
Yay!
And horror fans and horror scholars want to look at older movies and find the artistic merits of this. So when I was watching this movie, I'm trying to connect like, okay, how is this a high concept, beautiful film? And I don't really think it is. It's just it's very much an 80s horror film. It has it's elevated a little bit,
high level themes in it,
how it's presented, but like the end of the day, it's not like a cerebral film. There's some smart things to it, but it's not Midsummer. It's not Suspiria, where there's like these heavy contemplative themes about human relationships. We're watching a family get broken down by this thing. And like, I guess if there's any theme, it's the Lovecraftian theme, like you mentioned earlier, Jeremy, of something that is incomprehensible to us.
Doug, your thoughts on the overall vibe and horror and how this fits into the mythos?
This movie's interesting because I think it's a very faithful adaptation of a Lovecraft story, even though it does update it to a more contemporary time, not just in setting, but I think also in theme, because a lot of Lovecraft's, and this is something that's becoming more and more apparent now because just more attention is being drawn to it. Lovecraft was a full-blown racist, and
not cool dude,
not just racist for today, but probably racist for the 1920s.
Yeah, he was
like he had an especially strong hatred for Italians and the Irish, which is just that special kind of racism that you just don't get anymore.
That's right, homegrown.
But I feel like this movie is able to excise a lot of those themes of the subtext of prejudice in his earlier works, because the fish people of Innsmouth are supposed to be just a really shitty metaphor for...
It's the mixing of the races, right?
Right. Yeah. It's this perverted version of...
The joke, right? The joke is that every tentacled hell beast that Lovecraft describes is just an Italian.
Right.
that he's terrified of.
Exactly. This movie, I don't know. I'm assuming it was at least to some degree a conscious decision by Richard Stanley. Mm-hmm. But like, for example, the fact that the hydrologist is named Ward Phillips, which is a clear tip of the hat to HP himself. But also the fact that the character is portrayed by a black actor, which would have horrified HP himself, I'm sure. I think this is almost the ideal way to adapt Lovecraft from now on, is, try to get the themes of cosmic horror out, but also cut out the stuff that just doesn't need to be there, that was solely based on Lovecraft's own fears and prejudices.
You're vibing where I'm vibing, Doug. So I think this is a really great adaptation of Lovecraft for that reason, in that you have kind of this alien influence without, all of the wonderfully colorful and horrible and distinct racism that he, manifested in this time. One of the reasons why Lovecraft, and it's argued that he was able to write horror the way he was because of his xenophobia, was because of his prejudices of others, because he kept seeing white culture, the culture that he grew up with, this culture that he himself held in such high esteem, being infected by Black popular culture, race intermixing, the Irish, the Italians, and so on. But when you pull all of these individual characteristics out of it and you remove the localization, you can then, and this is what I love about Lovecraft, is when you pull out that, you still are left with the themes of invasion and infection by a corroding force, which still very much can be reinterpreted to fit the times that we are in now.
Mm-hmm.
The invading and corroding forces that we face right now are Mexican immigrants, Hispanic immigrants, homosexuals.
No.
The other part of Lovecraftian horror is, his horrible distaste and anger towards the homosexual community. Just like, just check all the boxes for problematic 1800s white guy. But yeah, just think about it. Think about how homosexuality was interpreted, especially in the 80s and the 90s, because, the filmmakers that we're experiencing now, that was when they were growing up on it. They were experiencing the AIDS epidemic while they were experiencing kind of the, it's not, but I'm using the parlance of the prejudice of the times, but the homosexual epidemic, right? The idea that you can catch being queer, that it is something that you can be infected by. And so you have this corroding force enter this small community and alter their reality and ultimately destroy them. And so this is how Jerry Falwell thinks of homosexuals. This is how he thinks of immigrants, and so on. We pulled all of the trimmings and the individual cultures away to these high level concepts, these alien concepts, this color that comes in and kills us. But there's still very much a human aspect to it, where ideology infects your mind. Oh wait, being gay is fine, right? And this is, we all, not all of us, but many of us have family members who think that we've been brainwashed or that we've been infected by this ideology that lets us allow ourselves to permit homosexuality around us, right? When in reality, what we're doing is realizing that humans are complex creatures that come in all sorts of varieties, and that is okay, and that should be allowed. They see it as some sort of perversion. They see it as some sort of force that's being forced upon us that will ultimately burn itself out through the power of the earth and through the power of Christ, however you want to interpret it. But, oh yeah, of course. Well, how could I forget? The times that we live in now. The external corrupting force that has pushed us all inside of our homes. It's made us turn against each other and made us reinterpret our relationships with our closest brethren. We have COVID, and we have literal infection coming in, and we have people reacting to that differently. And it's this alien force that we do not understand. People do not understand viruses. There's sort of a double-edged sword behind it, because you have the knowledgeable and understandable, rational steps you take for safety, but then you have, on one side of that, you have the ultimate dismissiveness. This color is not infecting us. There's nothing wrong. And then you have the ultimate hysteria, where you completely self-isolate and you can cut yourself off from your community, and you are terrified through every interaction, because every person could be a corrupting force. And so I think a film like this has a place right now, especially because we are experiencing a lot of invading forces in our culture and in our lives.
Yeah, H. Bomber Guy has a great video on Lovecraft in the queer community and how a lot of queer theory has been written about Lovecraft and how a lot of LGBT people, despite Lovecraft's bigotries, have an appeal and interest in Lovecraftian fiction.
He can write the experience of the other so well.
Right.
I really enjoyed the film. I would say the most exposure I have to Lovecraft is through board games and like tabletop games. So, which is kind of like a weird, like it's funny to see like that become such a dominating presence for just the general themes and everything. But to see a film and like, I don't know, I'm really into like Lovecraft country right now. So I was all about like a Lovecraftian movie, especially since I didn't know anything about it. I did have some issues with the pacing of the film. I really enjoyed what they did though, but certain things were rushed, and then like the wrong things were rushed and the wrong things were elongated, I guess. But
yeah, I can feel that. I think they did a clever thing of tying in the pacing of the film with the thematic idea of how is this thing fucking with time and space.
Yes.
I thought that was interesting, and that made me accept it better. It's like, oh, we don't know when night and day are anymore. Like,
because
it actually
like
worked for me, I think.
But upon like rewatching it, I was just like, you know what? This movie is about the ride and not necessarily the destination.
Yeah, it's not the deepest lore movie.
Yeah.
You know,
so although that there's some issues with it that I found, I thought it was really like, it's just like I have no qualms with it. I thought it was beautiful. I love the color. It made me wonder like what would have been better. Obviously the Technicolor bright pink and magenta and such is very vivid and eye catching, but I also couldn't help but think like how different the film would have been if it was filmed in like black white.
We might get a really great director's cut if we could get in.
Like that was my bit. I was just like, wow, this is really cool. But like, what if it was like because you don't know the color, it should be an absence of color.
Oh,
like,
see, I was thinking like
a lot.
Have it set in black and white, and then like the color parts.
No, like no bright Technicolor magenta.
The White
like
House
instead
for most of it, and then when the color's out, it becomes this like new retro wave neon hell. I thought I think that'd be really cool.
Because I get that you want, as the viewer, like for the viewers, you want them to be able to at least try to experience what the characters are experiencing, because it's a color that you've never seen, you can't really describe it, so you want to give them a color. And it was a very good choice of like I loved it, but I just couldn't help but wonder. I was like, I wonder how this would have looked if instead they just went the opposite.
Doug, send us off into this fine night.
I would argue, there was the McConaissance a few years back, in which Matt sort of found a rebirth.
True Detective sort of brought him back,
or as a performer rather. I hesitate to argue that Nicolas Cage is going through the same thing, because in my mind, he never fell.
Anymore, he gets his hand in the film in more ways than one. So like a lot of times, like he gets this, decision making and such. So he gets to do the projects that he wants to do, and Cage likes to do Cage films. Who would have thought?
Yeah. Well, he's not like a Tom Cruise who picks like this movie's going to boost my brand. He just wants to. He's having fun. This is a great movie for him to showcase like all the things we love about him as an actor, I think.
I think the thing that we learned the most out of this film is that it's not about the destination, it's the corruption we experienced along the way.
On the way. I will say that this is supposed to be the first of a trilogy of Richard Stanley Lovecraft.
Ah, that makes me so happy.
Yeah, next one's Dunwich Horror.
Yeah.
And that's a fucked story, and I hope it's a fucked movie. And it
will be.
Lovecraft is hard to interpret, and I think this was a good job of interpreting it in a lot of different ways. And so I'm interested to see where the king, the returning sorcerer prophet, brings us next.